Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining the Altecnic CPD, which is in partnership with Cibse West Midlands. I'm Stephanie Allchurch, Product Development Manager for Altecnic, and I will be running through this CPD on UK certification schemes. So just a little bit of housekeeping to ensure the webinar flows smoothly. If I can ask all participants to mute their microphones and pop any questions into the chat, and we will cover these at the end of the presentation. Thank you. So during the course of the CPD, we're going to be covering the following topics. So I'll give you an understanding of the water supply, water fittings regulations, what certification schemes there are in the UK, what test houses there are in the UK and the differences between those two. We'll talk through the process of testing products and what that entails. We'll cover the resources that are available to specifiers to help find approved products. And lastly, we will look at who is responsible for meeting water regulations. So if we start now with the water supply, water fittings regulations, these set out the design, maintenance and operating standards required for plumbing systems in all types of premises. They're really looking at preventing waste, misuse, undue consumption and contamination of that water system. In particular, we're going to highlight Regulation 4. Regulation 4 is looking at wholesome water fittings, or to use other names for it, drinking water, potable water. And that's specifically important as we must cover the particular quality and standard for the intended purpose of the product and make sure it isn't going to contravene any of the waste, misuse, undue consumption or contamination. But most importantly, that it's actually going to be safe for consumption. Okay. If we look then, I've highlighted here the 3 certification bodies there are in the UK. So RAS in particular is probably the scheme that most people will recognise. So it's got a high level of recognition with installers, manufacturers and specifiers. I think some of the success has really come from manufacturers who have continually promoted the RAS logo and the RAS scheme. So you show compliance with your products and you promote this recognition. But there are also 2 other schemes that are prevalent in the UK. So we have NSF Reg 4. NSF is a global company. They are not only just a certification body, but they are also a test house as well. And Kiwa Reg 4 is a similar certification, and they too have a accredited test house, but they also have a certification scheme as well. So if you see any of these logos being promoted, it should show the same level of compliance for the product in question and give you the assurance that these products are suitable for the water regulations in the UK. So a little bit more detail about the test houses in particular. UCAS is the sole accreditation body in the UK. It's recognised by government to assess against national and international agreed standards that provide conformity assessment services such as certification, testing, inspection, calibration and verification. Accreditation by UCAS demonstrates the competence, impartiality and performance capability of these evaluators. In short, UCAS checks the checkers. Both NSF and Kiwa are classified as a functional test house, and both of them have their own certification scheme as well. So as well as these two companies having their own certification scheme, they are also able to submit test reports to RAS to allow manufacturers to gain RAS approval certification for their products too. There are other test houses and certification schemes in the UK. For example, BSI have recently set up a scheme. However, predominantly, these two are the market leaders when it comes to water regulation compliance. So what is the process for testing products? This really all starts with an application form which is made. So the application form consists of a schedule of materials. That schedule of materials breaks down to granular detail and looks at the non-metallic materials that are used, particularly on non-metallics. However, if it is, as an example, a brass, then it may be that you need to detail whether that is a DZR brass. So there are that schedule of materials will be very detailed. If we use a tap as a common example of what you may be approving, you would break it down to every single component on there. Each of those components must have a valid materials approval number. So as an example, again, going back to that tap, if there was an O-ring contained within there, that O-ring should have its own approval number. If it doesn't have its own approval number, it is possible to actually undergo some testing on that particular component. The testing standard for that is BS 6920, and there are 6 tests which are predominant to that particular standard. The tests that they would undergo are looking at the odour and flavour, any change in appearance, microbial growth, substances of concern to human health, leaching of toxic metals, and suitability for use at high temperatures. It's also interesting to understand that this particular test can take up to 12 weeks to perform. And as we go through this process, you will start to see that depending on the complexity of the product, it can be quite a lengthy process. So once you have gathered up your schedule of materials, your drawings and your application form, you will submit that to one of the test houses. The test house will then review and validate the application, and they will also then consider what tests are appropriate for the specific product. So again, if we look at our tap, that may be endurance testing of the open and closing function. And as an example, that endurance testing can be up to, depends on every product, but for a tap, we'd be looking at probably around 200,000 cycles. So once the test house has reviewed and suggested what appropriate testing can be applied to the product, the manufacturer will then need to supply production samples. So it's important that these samples are completely based on the product that will be in production. So making sure all the correct materials are used and the correct markings are in place. So when we're talking about new products that we're launching, we need to make sure that the design is all closed off and that these are at the production stage before we actually submit these for approval. The test house will then take those samples and perform the relevant tests and collate the results in a report. The testing, again, there is obviously a lead time on that testing. Some products only need to go undertake a review or perhaps dimensional checks. Other products, we can be looking at endurance testing. If I give you an example, some plastic piping, will go through thermal cycling testing, and that testing can take up to 12 weeks because it's continuously left on a rig cycling. So again, depending on what the product is, it will depend on how long that takes to undertake with the test house. But once the test house has performed all the relevant tests and collated the results, they will report back to manufacturers on those results. And assuming that all the results are positive and they pass, then this will be submitted to the certification body. And as I've previously mentioned, that may be a department within the test house that is responsible for the certification. It will be an independent team that will review and validate all of the collated information. So not only the original schedule of materials, but also the test results as well. Alternatively, if you are looking to gain RAS approval on the certification, then the test results and those applications will all be submitted to RAS, and they will then independently review those results. An additional step which happens with the RAS approval is that the products are actually submitted to a PAG committee. PAG refers to the Product Approvals Advisory Group. And this is made up of a group of experts from the water companies or water authorities. And they will actually review the physical products that have been tested. They may look at some of the functional elements of those products. They'll review the markings of those products. And again, they will run through the reports that support that product to make sure everything is aligned and that they are confident that the product is fit for purpose. Those meetings are held between every 6 to 8 weeks. And once that has been assessed, there will be a decision made on that product. Again, if successful, then the product will be issued with a certification. And when this certification is issued, that will be passed back to the manufacturer. And it will also allow the certification scheme to publicise the approved product on their website. And we'll go into a bit more detail about that on the next slide. It's important to understand that these certifications are valid for 5 years from the date of issue. And when we do want to renew these certifications, we actually begin the process from scratch all over again. So when we are launching new products, when we are working on renewals, we are constantly looking at estimating what time frame we need to allow to undergo these this testing and this process for approval to ensure that when we launch the product, we do have the approvals in place. So I mentioned before the database. So each of the certification schemes that we've talked about, RAS, NSF and KIWA, have a database on their website which lists all the approved products. Each of these databases can be filtered and searched by different means, so product types, specific testing, materials or keywords. Although beware, if you're going to type O-ring into the search, you're probably going to come up with a lot of results. In fact, RAS actually advised that their database contains over 9,000 product ranges and 3,000 materials. So there is a lot of information here. But when you do take a look at these databases with the approved products, what you will find is that they give you some useful information about that approved product. So the database will detail the scope and description of the product, along with some key characteristics like the maximum working pressures or temperatures as an example. They also Importantly, again, highlight the markings that are represented on the product. If you are a water authority and you are actually going to a site where these products are already installed, then those markings are really important. It's the markings that you're going to be reviewing on the product to understand if these are actually located on the database, and that's how you're going to use that. It's those markings that you're going to use to identify and locate the approvals for these products. It also lists all of the models that are covered, because most companies will actually choose to group their products together, particularly when there is a range of, let's say, thermostatic mixing valves just with differing connection sizes. And that's the example that you see on screen now. So finally, I've talked a lot about what manufacturers do to ensure compliance with their products. But it's also important to advise that while most reputable manufacturers will ensure that their products are fit for purpose, it's not actually the responsibility of the manufacturer or the manufacturer's obligation. In fact, it's not illegal to manufacture and sell non-compliant products. In fact, the onus is purely on the installer to ensure compliance, because it goes back to the water fittings and water regulations that we originally spoke about. It's also important to understand that water companies are duty bound to enforce the laws and inspect new or existing installations to ensure compliance. And it is actually considered an offence if products or non-compliant products are found and can result in prosecution. So a few things that I would just suggest that you consider, which is working with reputable manufacturers. These will spend a lot of time and resource to gain approvals and supply compliant products or fittings. Look out for the certification logos. Most manufacturers are proud of their approvals on their products and will show these on their website or within the product literature. Don't forget that the approvals database from the certification schemes can be interrogated to source products as well as validate compliance on existing sites. And last but not least, it is the installer's responsibility to ensure compliant products are utilised and installed. Thank you for your time and thanks for listening.